binders like now, so if you have it, you can probably maybe ask me at the end of class, just not while I'm teaching. If you lost points on it or never turned it in at all, there's a comment in Infinite Campus and Schoology that says when the last day to submit it is for. So that's May 16th. After that, I do not have to accept it. Do it sooner than later. I probably will not remind you about it again. We are testing for Unit 7 tomorrow. So I asked you to, over the weekend, have attempted your study guides. So that way you're here ready to ask me about questions that are still difficult for you. We might answer the majority of them, but what I feel like some people do is just say like random questions that kind of aren't necessarily the ones that they've attempted already. You want to save this time for like the hardest ones. So hopefully you've done what I told you and tried it first so that you know which ones are the hardest ones. And you'll see them again tomorrow, just with different numbers. So what questions do we still have? On either portion of the study guide. On the constructed response? Okay, so let me pull it up. All right, but we're looking at the constructed response in case any of you want to get that out. That's one where you have to do it on paper and submit it to Schoology. So we're doing it together. There's no reason I shouldn't have submissions from you. So for number 3, that one says that a community theater uses this function to model the profit in dollars expected in a weekend when the tickets to a comedy show are priced at $D each. So part A, we're writing and solving an equation to find the prices at which the theater would earn $2,000 in profit from the comedy show each weekend. So our two variables, P stands for what? P stands for incorrect. Profit. So that's specifically, I don't know how else to describe it. Their profit is after taking away like their costs to put on the show. Profit is all the money they make in addition to that. So then my D stands for what? Dollars, and in other words, because profit is in dollars too. So let's just make it more specific. Price of tickets. Okay, so yes, it is in dollars, but that's specifically the price of the ticket. So then is that $2,000 going into the profit or the ticket price? Profit. So it's going to be replacing this part of it because we're wanting to figure out at what ticket price, so at what D value gives me a profit of $2,000. Does that make sense? The setup? Okay, so that's how we know to plug it in there, not for dollars, because not each ticket is costing $2,000, right? That's not how it's going. So we set it equal that way. Now, how you choose to solve for what the D is up to you. We've learned a few different ways. Some are more efficient than others. So like, would you factor in this one? Probably not, because the numbers are kind of big, so it probably wouldn't be optimal. So completing the square, probably same thing. The numbers are too big for that, or at least to do it effectively. So your options are quadratic formula or by graphing. Which one do you want to do? Quadratic. Raise your hand if you say quadratic formula. Raise your hand if you say graphing. It looks like quadratic formula wins. I think everyone wins. So, well, out of the people that did, quadratic formula wins. Either way is fine. So, for this one, if I'm solving it by quadratic formula, what do I need to do first? I can not
Oh, yeah, making.
make it equal to 0. How do I make the 2000 0? Whatever you do on one side. So then on the left side, it is now 0. On the right, combine like terms, so negative 5d squared plus 395d. What's negative 800 minus 2000? Okay, great. Now I can do what?
You plug in the 800.
So then, and we're not really in our tables anymore, so I'll just follow you randomly. So then, what's my A? What do you think? Close. Lane? -5. So your A, B, and C should never be variables. Dylan? For B, it is 395, good. Alex, what's my C?
20.
Negative 2800. All right, but yeah, good. Questions on that? All right, then now after identifying that, we do what with it? Am I making you memorize the formula?
No.
No, I would rather you memorize like the steps for each one, but good job. I am providing you the quadratic formula. So plugging it in, if x equals negative, what goes here where my mouse is, Connor? Formula's over here for reference. Try again. 395, because it's negative b, so plug in with parentheses, b was 395. What goes here, Elise, where my mouse is? Okay, 395 squared minus 4 times what, Nolan? -5 times what, Nicholas? Negative 2800. All over 2 times what, Elijah? All over 2 times what? Sorry, what? It will be A, yes. What is my A?
On the right. On the right, is 8 on the right. Okay.
Okay, good. Questions on that? Where to find what A is, B is, C is? Other than when you wrote it down, but we all know. Okay, so I would not skip any part of this step. I know some of it you could do in your head, like the 2 times -5, I'm sure you know is equal to what? No. -10. But like the rest, I would just say like wait till you get to this step to simplify it. So like this will be -395, there's no double negative there. Plus or minus. What do we call the stuff that's underneath the square root symbol? Lane? What do we call the stuff that's underneath the square root symbol? No.
Oh, the radical.
Well, you're kind of, that's like, it would be a radicand, but in the quadratic formula, there's a special name for it. Okay, well, the discriminant is what it's called. So the discriminant, what do I tell you is the best way to solve that? Desmos. At this level, I do not expect you to do that part by hand, because that's like long division, you don't have to do it anymore now that you have calculators. So 395 squared. Oops, hold on. Minus 4 times -5 times -2800. That is a big number, right? I'm pretty sure it's not a perfect square. We could check it if you want. So 100,025, not a perfect square. So I'm just gonna leave it as 100,025 under the square root symbol. Because from here, we have to split up that plus or minus, right? So -395 plus the square root of that large number is something we'll type in. And then also -395 minus the square root of that number. Sorry, kind of running out of room. But type in both and then see what you get. And if one of the answers doesn't make sense, then don't worry about that answer, but let's see if it makes sense. So -395 plus square root of 100,025. Oh, I put too many zeros. Right, 1, 2, 3, okay, good. Over -10. So they're saying that in order to get that profit of $2,000, I need to make my ticket price either make it look like money, so where would I round to? So 7.87. And then you're also gonna wanna solve it for when it's minus. So -395 minus, I forgot to put the square, the fraction. Is it about this, Isabella? So then. Same thing, but now it's minus, and this also you want to make look like money. So you have two answers for this. We need to identify the both of them. At both of these ticket prices, you can have a profit of $2,000. Question? Now, was that the only part you needed help with, Mikey, on that one, or?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. The second part, don't get it confused with the first part. The second part wants to know when it would make the maximum profit. So don't use the equal to 2,000, use the original one. Okay. Questions on anything? Okay, Isabella, what did you need? Yes. Questions done? Yes. Kaylin? On the constructor response? Okay. So number one on the constructed response. Have to switch it over. So number one, to solve x squared minus 3x equals 0, may rewrote the equation as x times x minus 3 in parentheses equals 0. Explain how rewriting this equation in factored form enables her to solve the equation. So how does factoring allow you to solve the equation for the zeros? I'm asking you guys. How does factoring allow us to solve for the zeros? So what's another name for zeros? Okay, good. So how does writing it in factored form let us solve for the x's? what are my x's going to be?
Zero. Oh. I know why.
Well, the y would have to be 0. Because we're solving for the zeros. How does writing it in factor form let us do that? What do we do with factors?
Oh.
Okay, say that louder, Bailey. So if these are my two factors, x and x minus 3, and they multiply to give me 0, one of them must give me 0. Doesn't matter which one. So that's why when it's in factored form, once you get to your two factors or more, there could be more. You set each factor equal to 0 and solve for the x's. So like this one already has it isolated, so that's easy. X could be 0 and that'll make it equal 0. What minus 3 equals 0? So these are my two x's, my two zeros, right? So you have to explain how rewriting it as factored form enables her to solve the equation. So you could mention the zero product property. That's really what you did. If the product of factors is 0, one of the factors must be 0. There's a lot of ways you can go about it. If you really want to sound smart, you can mention the zero product property by name. You could say per the zero product property. And that's really why factoring works at all. Multiply to get 0, one of them must equal 0. So you set it equal to 0 and then solve it. Good? Okay, so then part B of this one says solve 2x squared equals 8x by rewriting the equation. How would you rewrite it? Well, figure out the way that it looks. How would you want to solve it? Graphing is out of the question because it says rewriting. So, what'd you say, Eliza? Okay. I would say completing the square is out of the question because there's no C. Okay, factoring could work. If I want it to work, what do I have to do? What'd you say, Kaylin? Get everything on one side. I would say it really doesn't matter what side, but I would say try to keep the A positive. So how would I move the 8x to the other side? And whatever you do on one side? Are these like terms? No, one of them is x squared, the other one is an x. So just write them next to each other. It's a negative because we moved it to the other side by subtracting. And then when you're solving by factoring, what do you always check for first? Do I have a GCF? So yeah, 2 divides evenly into both. Do they both have an X? How many can I factor out? Just 1. Earlier, someone said 2. You cannot because this one doesn't have 2. So it's always like the smaller amount of X's is what you can factor out. So the GCF will be outside the parentheses. Inside is what you get from dividing each term by your GCF. These 2's cancel here, these x's cancel here, the rest you need to simplify. What's x squared divided by x? Good. What's negative 8 divided by 2? Good, still equal to 0. So now that you have it in factored form, so as things that can be multiplied together and it equals 0, how do I continue solving? Not by FOILing, that would get me back to the original, I don't want that. I want what X equals. How do you send it back? But that would just get me back to where I started, right? Doesn't it help me find what X equals? How did we do it up here? In part A? So you set each factor equal to 0 and solve for your X. So opposite of multiplying by 2 is good. X equals what, 0 minus or divided by 2? Good, so X could be 0, and that would make this part 0, which would multiply to equal 0. And then over here, what minus 4 gives me 0? So these are my 2 zeros. So for show your reasoning, I would accept some work shown, or you could explain the steps. Questions on that? Okay. So part C says, explain why dividing each side of 2x squared equals 8x by 2x is not reliable. So we already solved that. We said it's 0 and 4. So let's see what happens if we divide each side by 2x. Because you can do the same thing, or you can do something to either side as long as you do it to both sides, right? So let's see what we get. 2 divided by 2 cancels out. X divided by x cancels out. So simplify. What's x squared divided by x? What's 8 divided by 2? That's one of my answers, right? But why is this method not reliable? So you could say this method is not reliable because why? It doesn't solve for both of them because it only solves for one of the zeros. So it does isolate the x, which is like usually our goal, but there's usually 2 answers for quadratic functions. So it doesn't find both of them. That's why it's not reliable. Nolan, question? Yes. So 1 fully explained, does that make sense? Okay, so I expect good scores on the constructed response tomorrow because we almost went over the whole thing of it. And I expect it to be submitted in school as too. What else do we need help with on either portion? Grace? Number 6. So let's see. Okay, so the method of completing the square can be used to transform this into this format. So that is why we teach you all the steps of all the different methods, because this looks like one of the steps in completing the square. So you have to solve it by completing the square and then stop when you get to that step to identify what goes in the P and the Q spot. So for completing the square, what is my first step? If you need to look at your notes, that's okay for now. Just remember everything that you're looking up. You need to have memorized by tomorrow. Rewrite it into what?
Where it equals 0?
It already equals 0. Do I want it to equal 0 for completing the square? All right, so that is true. That is from our lesson 13 notes, just FYI, like we're not making this up. It wants the C to be alone on one side. So move the C. What's my C? How do I move it? Whatever you do on one side. So that cancels there. I get x squared minus 8x equals 0 minus 4 is -4. So that's step 1. Step 2, what do we do? Half, half of B. And then what do you do with it? Square root it. Square it, and then what do you do with it? Okay, well, we're on a good track. So what is my B? What's half of my B? And what is -4 squared? Okay, great. That 16 is what we add to both sides. And you might think that's like a really random step. We went over why it's like that in the lesson. So if you really want to know, maybe it'll help you remember it better, then it's in that lesson. But it is a step, just memorize the step. Half of B, square it, then add it to both sides. So we're adding 16 to both sides. On the left, there's no like term, so it should make a trinomial. On the right, what's -4 plus 16? Yes. 12. All right, now step 3 is to do what? But it still doesn't look like where we have to stop at. So step 3 is to look at how this is written. It has just one set of parentheses squared. So what do you think I need to do? Well, that's what you would do after that step. How do I go from where I'm at right now to make it look like this? Factor it. Factoring it is the correct answer, and it's in the notes, just FYI, I'm not making this up. Factor the perfect square trinomial. So that means on the left side, when I factor it, would be 16 on the top, -8 on the bottom. What multiplies to 16 but adds to -8? 4. And so like that. Take it at me. Yep, now it works. And that should be a perfect square. That's why we call it completing a square. So step 2 makes it a perfect square trinomial. Step 3, we factor it so that we can write it as a perfect square and then continue by square rooting and all that stuff. But this one just wants you to stop at this step and identify your P and your Q. So what's my P? It is not -4. Positive, because the negative's already in the formula. And then what's my Q? So it should be the perfect. I feel like we would have time for another one, but you guys seem pretty checked out. So you're all ready for tomorrow? Any last requests?
Yeah.
Okay, I have time to look more. Time. Number 3 on this one. So number 3 on this one. Real quick, you could probably memorize how to do it later if you already put your plan. So Angelo wants to graph the quadratic function shown. At what point does the graph of the function intersect the x-axis? Okay, just Desmos it. How would you know where to look? Good. So yeah, just Desmos it. 1/3 x squared. I'll type it in this one. All right, 1/3 x squared minus 2x minus 9. I think the only time I see people mess up is where they forget one of the x's. But yeah, make sure it looks exactly how it looks on your paper. Do look at the x-axis, that was the other name for solution, was x-intercept. And that should match one of the answers. Good? Can't wait to see it.